I guess kind of it was an accident. I stumbled into it. I was joking around with some friends one day. We were talking about Bigfoot, and Genesis 25:25 just kind of popped into my head there. And for those that's unfamiliar, that's the birth of Esau. And it says the first one came out red, covered in hair from head to toe, like a hairy cloak. And I was like, man, that sounds pretty squatchy to me, fellas. What do you think? And so it was just kind of like a little inside joke. But then I started stumbling across other things. Like I was going through the book of Jasher, and you find more of these hairy wild men in there. And Esau supposedly battles King Nimrod. They fight to the death for the supernatural garments from the Garden of God. And then the Epic of Gilgamesh, I thought that looked like just a mirrored parallel of Esau and Nimrod. And so I just started researching this guy. And I started going through all the extra biblical books and texts, and all of them point to Esau being a serpent seed. So then I started going down the trail of the serpent seed, going back to Genesis and Cain, and it just kind of branched off from there, honestly. And I got introduced to Nicholas DeVere, the Dragon Legacy, and that honestly just runs parallel with the Genesis narrative, and even the elites. They claim to be stemmed from this dragon court, going back to Cain, and claiming they have the divine right to rule.
Yeah, and we had David Icon, and he was talking about the history of the elite and royal bloodlines. So, if you're getting started then with the history of this, how far back does it go? What's the earliest we can talk about?
Yeah, for me, I think it goes back to the very beginning. If you go to the biblical narrative in Genesis, you have this Garden of Eden scene. And growing up, I was always just taught that Adam and Eve bit into this apple, and it was that tree of forbidden fruit of good knowledge, good and evil knowledge, and that they were kicked out of the garden for it. And that was the first sin that kicked off the world, basically. And like I said, when I had read that about this serpent seed with Esau, I went back to Genesis and got to reading it. And I actually had an interview with this woman named Dr. Joy Pugh, and she honestly, she's the one that red pilled me in this because I'd heard about the serpent seed theory before, but I never looked into it. Uh, I had some highly respectable guys that I really enjoyed their work would scoff at it and say there's no water to be held in that cup. So I just kind of took their word for it, never looked into it. And when I had her on the show, she brought it up. And I'm not going to lie, when she brought it up, in my head, I was like, oh no, here we go. This is going to be some crazy serpent seed stuff. I didn't want to go here. But I listened with an open mind. And I'm not going to lie, she totally changed my paradigm. And I've been reading this Bible totally different ever since. But she was a Southern woman. She was from Georgia, so she might have, got to me a little better. She had that Southern, accent, reminded me of my grandma, But she was talking. She said, "I was always talking about this apple." She said, "I went back and read." She said, "There is no apple," and I was like, "What?" And sure enough, yeah, I went back. Yeah, there's no apple there. And she said, "If we look, it just says they partake. Eve partakes of this tree." And that after she partakes of this tree, what happens? She said, they immediately cover their reproductive organs. And then she said, then look at the cursings. She said, every single one of the cursings has something to do with sexual reproduction. She said, if you look at the Bible, all of God's curses correlate to the crime. She said, so the curses were that he would put enmity between her seed and thy seed, talking to the serpent. So it says plainly right there that she's going to have a seed, humanity, and the serpent is going to have a seed, and they're going to be at enmity, at war with one another, and that he would increase her menstruation, and he would increase her pain in childbearing and labor. And so, yeah, every single one of these curses is correlated to sexual reproduction. And then she said, and then if you go into the etymology of the names, she said, the names are important. Words mean things. She said, Cain, his name means acquired. She said, what loving mother would name their child acquired? She said, this is something that, parents think about for months in advance and debate and have a whole list of names. She said, why would any loving mother name their child Acquired? She said, because he was acquired by Adam. And she said, if you look at Abel, his name, when you go into the etymology of that name, that means breath. She said, why did they name him breath? She said, because Adam was a lifeless being until the breath of God was given to him. So he was named after his father because he was of his similitude. And then she said, as soon as you get out of the garden, what happens? Cain kills Abel. There's war, there's enmity between the two seeds and the two lines. And I was like, oh man, and she said, she pulled out all these other verses too, where afterwards Seth was born. And it says that Seth was in the similitude of Adam because the other wasn't. He was, and his name actually means replacement. He was the replacement seed. And as you go through the book, I think that I found just all of these micro and macro and micro narratives telling the same story.
I found that I kind of just went down the trail, and I had a bunch of people when I started talking to my friends about this. They were like, Satan's not a tree. How are you getting that? And when you go through the scripture, there's several verses that compares Satan to a tree allegorically. When he's talking to the Pharaoh of Egypt, he's talking to the Pharaoh, condemning him and all this stuff, but then the language changes. He's no longer talking to the king. He's talking to the spiritual entity behind the king. And he's saying that, you were in the Garden of Eden. You're the most beautiful tree. And all the other trees of Eden, looked at you with jealousy for your beauty. Uh, and it says that, you'll be cast down when you get to the Isaiah 14 passage. It talks about, this is the famous verse where, how art thou fallen from heaven, O day star? It says that you will be cut down. And it talks about the branches. It says that the Satan, the Hasatan, is the abominable branch. And you get this same genealogical language with the righteous branch also, because it talks about the coming of the Messiah, and it says that he would be of the root of the seed of Jesse, and he would be the righteous branch. So when you get the lingo of trees, it's always talking about genealogies and family trees. And you have all these examples of Satan being compared to this tree, this beautiful, the most beautiful tree in the Garden of Eden. So when I show people that, they're like, "Oh, well, he's talking to that king. That's not Satan." Well, this king was not in the Garden of Eden. The angels and the angelic host didn't look at this guy and glory and envy of all his beauty. And then when you go to Ezekiel 28, that is the same exact same thing there. This is a condemnation to the king of Tyre. And yeah, he's clearly talking to this king. But partway through, once again, the language changes. He's no longer talking to this king. He's talking to the spiritual entity, the Hasatan behind the king and the ruler. And he says, you were in the Garden of Eden, once again, perfect in all your ways, until iniquity was found in you, and you were cast from the mountain of God as a profane thing. And it says, every precious stone was your covering. It says beryl, onyx, topaz, jasper. It names all these stones. And this is a Polaroid picture of the priestly ephod. So it's painting Satan in a priestly role. And then not only is it painting him in a priestly role, just to remove any doubt whatsoever, when you go on down just a couple verses, it says that you profaned your sanctuaries and that you walked amongst the stones of fire. So they're painting him as like the high priest over all creation. And when I started digging into the story of Genesis a little deeper, and once I talked to my friend, Dr. Joy Pugh, she was talking about some of the Hebrew language and how these words are just like any other language. You have one word that can have multiple meanings. So it's important to go back and insert those different meanings and see which one fits better in the context. And so the nakash is that the Hebrew word that we get in the garden for this serpent. Well, nakash can mean serpent, but at the same time, it can also mean the shining one, or the one who practices divination. So if you ask yourself, what makes more sense? A talking snake deceived Adam and Eve on the holy mountain of God, or a divine being, a shining one, deceived Adam and Eve? Because number one, snakes don't talk. And if a snake talked, we would see the context that Eve and Adam would have been taken back by it, but they weren't. And not only were they not taken back, they were very receptive to what this entity said to them. It didn't even second guess him. They believed him and they trusted him. I think because they were familiar with him. They seen him in the garden of God because he was the high priest. And if you look at it, like I said, with the original languages too, everybody wants to argue with me and say, well, it says that they ate. That's not a sexual act. And I was like, well, yeah, once again, if you go into the Hebrew, that same word multiple times throughout the text is translated to enjoys. So Eve partook of the tree and she enjoyed. And then she goes to her husband and he too enjoyed. And I started looking at this and formulating this idea and opinion. And then once I went through the extra biblical books, this was the belief of the ancients. So it was kind of like a confirming thing for me. But I was like, okay, if we look at this as a family, we have the angelic host, and they are the elder brothers. They're the elder race, like Timothy Alberino likes to say. And the book of Job tells us, when he finally condemns Job, he says, where were you when I hung the stars? Where were you when I laid the foundations? Answer me these things if you know. He said, and where were you when the morning stars, the sons of God, the B'nai Ha Elohim, shouted for joy at the sight of creation? So that shows you that they were there first. They are our elder brothers. So we are the younger brother. So imagine the elder brother who helped run the family business was the high priest. All of a sudden, he's running the company, and then dad shows up with the little brother, says, okay, hey, I know you've done a real good job thus far, but here, your younger brother's going to take over the company and have dominion over the company now. Of course, he was like, hell no. I'm not bound down to this little twerp. I'm greater than him. I've been here since the beginning. I helped build all this. No. So that's the reason for the rebellion, I believe. And it says in there that after this happens, that God provides for them a covering. And I was always taught that, once again, something that's not in the text. I mean, it's a beautiful picture, but it's just not in the text. But I was always taught that this was like a foreshadowing of Christ, that when they sinned, something had to die. And once it died, the blood that was shed, they took the skins of this animal, and that was to cover their nakedness. And like I said, I mean, that's a beautiful thought, but the text doesn't say that. It just says that when you go into the Hebrew, that he provided them a kanonet. And many times that this word is translated to tunic. And so I was like, well, the extra biblical books say that Adam and Eve's coverings were the skins of the nakash. And you remember Ezekiel 28, every precious stone was your covering, beryl, onyx, topaz, jasper. He would definitely be a shining one with this breastplate on. I mean, it kind of fits the description of his name, but it says that was his covering. So if his covering was taken from him and given to Adam, this is the priestly ephod. And so this is like the crown or the scepter. It shows authority of the king and priest of creation. And there is where dominion was given to Adam. So this seed war, you have younger brother, elder brother, and they're fighting and battling over the birthright. Who's going to have dominion over the earth? And the serpent seed, where they are the quote unquote elder brothers, they feel like they were screwed out of their birthright and their inheritance. So they rebelled, and they're fighting the younger brother, which is humanity, for the dominion of earth. And I think we see it, like I said, like micro and macrocosms all through the text. And you had mentioned it in pre-roll. The parables of Jesus even tells this same story, guys. They're trying to beat it into your head, but it's there for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. When Jesus is talking, he gives a parable about the good tenant. In this story, he says a landowner, God, leases out a piece of land to some farmers, the angelic host, and they had an agreement that he would let them use the land and farm it and work it, but when it come time for harvest, the owner would get the first fruits. Well, harvest time comes, and they don't want to pay up. So he sends his messenger, aka the prophet. And what do? They beat the prophet and send him away. So then he sends another prophet, another messenger. They kill this one. And then he says, well, I'll send my son. They will not harm my son. And when the son shows up, they plot and they say, we'll kill the son. Then there's no one to inherit this land, and it'll be ours. And he'll know that we mean business. So they kill the son. That son was Jesus. And it's the story of the dominion of earth and the birthright, the battle of the birthright and the seed wars. Another one, the parable of the sowing of the seeds. Okay, it's the same context. It's a landowner with land. He sows some seed, and it says that in his absence, the adversary, and when you go into the Hebrew, that is the Hasatan, the Satan, sown his seed. And seeds always talk about genealogies and children. Okay, then it says that the workers come back to the owner and say, sir, did you not plant good seed? But behold, there's tares growing amongst the wheat. Shall we pull them up? And he says, no, lest you harm the wheat in pulling up the tares. He said, no, let them grow together. And come harvest time, we will pull them all up and will separate the wheat from the tares and bind up the tares and throw them into the fire. And we will bound up the wheat to store into my barns. I think he's clearly talking about the seed war. The tares were sown amongst the wheat, and we have the serpent seed amongst us today, I do believe.
And who would that be?
That's all your ruling classes. You know, you have the Merovingians, you have the DeVeres, and they've tried their best to obfuscate, their identities and who they are, but that's who they are. They're amongst us. And if you go back through the Bible, it's you have Genesis 6 also. It says the B'nai Ha Elohim, the sons of God, came down and bred with the daughters of men and made Nephilim giants. They were the mighty men of old, the Gibor. And I think science shows us the theory of entropy very well. Nothing gets better over time. Everything gets worse. And I think that's what we see with these bloodlines. It's like over time, that DNA strand got weaker and weaker. And through interbreeding, they really diluted down the bloodline. And that's why you have so many royals that resulted into incest, breed with each other, trying to keep that bloodline pure because it was starting to fade away and dilute away. So they're trying everything they can to try and preserve this bloodline. And it's not working out too well for them. They're having reproductive issues. And we also know after incest so many years, you have birth defects and brain abnormalities and things like that. So it's not really working out in their favor, but they're trying everything that they can. And when I got into Nicholas DeVere, his book, that gave me the whole secular side of it. And these DeVeres that they claim to be from this dragon court. And I thought it was really fascinating how they come at you with a non-biblical perspective, but every single bit of it references back and points to it. It's like that's the starting point, because they even point back to Cain, and that's where they draw their beginnings from. But in the beginning of the book, DeVere was talking about how you have all these Wiccans and witches and sorcerers and stuff practicing all this kind of magic. He says that these Merovingians and these ancient bloodlines that are the real deal sit back and laugh at these people. He said because they could have the perfect spell books, they could have the ancient grimoires with all the spells and stuff that worked, back in the day. He said they could follow it to a T, but they're not going to get the same results because the power is in the blood. And the Bible even tells you that. It says how many times it says, do not drink the blood. The life force, the power is in the blood. And so he talks about how all this stuff through culture just kind of really aggravates this dragon court, how these people are trying to imitate them and do the things that they could do, but they're just not bred for it. They don't have the power. And he even talked about their struggle in breeding and reproducing also. And he said that what they had resulted in doing was to interbreeding with the mudblood, so to speak, as Harry Potter likes to put it, and to bring in people into their family like as an adoption. They would do bloodletting, and they would drink and consume the blood of the royale, and that way they had their blood in them. So whether it's true or not, we can debate, but we cannot debate that this is what they believe. And if they believe it, I think we owe it to ourselves, in the very least, to study out what they believe and why they do what they do, because these are the people in control. These are the people with the money and with the power and the status. So I think it's so very important that we know what they think they know or believe.
So how does all this tie in then with other ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians?
Yeah. See, I think it's the same story, but just told through different lenses and different perspectives. Because there's a reason why all these stories rhyme. I think because they all stem from the same ancient source. When you get to the Anunnaki and their stories, what happens there? They're these gods that came down and tried to domesticate the earth, and they make this garden, and they get tired of doing the work, so they create this human class as like worker bees. And then Enki, who's basically a mirrored image of the Hasatan, what does he do? He goes in and genetically modifies a new race, and this race has intelligence and can rebel against the creators. I mean, this is the same story I've been talking about to you tonight, folks. It's just told from a different lens, a different perspective. And for those that want to try to poo-poo on the Bible and say, these texts outdate the Bible, so therefore I did it again. But they copy from the Bible. So if we follow the biblical story, it says in there that Genesis 6, when the angels came down and bred with the daughters of men, they were kicked out for it. So, of course, you're going to get their story first because they were here first. So even the timeline makes sense to me. And when we go to all these other texts and these other legends and stories, they're all the same. I mean, the caveats are a little different. The names change a little bit, but overall, I mean, it's the same story. There we
All
go. I
right.
worked it.
Yeah, you're back. All right. So, viewers, your audio is fine. We're here with Doc Brown. I just want to let the viewers know if you want to support Doc's work, we've got all of his links in the description box on YouTube. And I'm going to put them all in the live chat now: YouTube, Twitter, podcast. If you've got any questions for Doc while we are live, put them in the chat right now. I see that a few questions have already come in, but please, by all means, keep them coming. And we will keep going with this. So my question is, if these bloodlines, like you said, they create these the defects, the incest, etc. As we saw with the royal family bringing in Princess Diana, that's what David Icke said. That was a genetic thing. Why do they try to keep these bloodlines going then? If they've got all of, if they can create defects, birth defects.
Yeah, because which I'm no geneticist, but I mean I've listened to some people talk on these things, and I've heard them talk about how any mutation in your DNA is random. It's all random mutation, so it's kind of like Russian roulette. So it's like they know they run the chance of these defects and it not working, but they're so desperate to try to hold on to the power, and I think even the magic, if you want to call it that, of their blood. So they're like, yeah, we know it runs risks, but the risk is worth the reward, I believe, is their mindset. And like we talked about just throughout the years, these what's the word, mutations, they manifest in different ways, I believe. I think that's why we have not only in the Bible but throughout the world these legends about these giants. I think it manifested in giganticism sometimes. I think the elongated skulls that we see is another one of those random mutations from the fallen angel DNA, the serpent seed. Uh, we get to looking at hairy men like Esau, how I talked about. Even science recognizes this. They call it hypertrichosis. And they even admit that it's a malfunction in the DNA. And I did not know this till I got to looking into the research for my book, was we are all covered in hair in the womb. And they call it Lugano hair, I believe is how it's pronounced. But at a certain point in the third trimester, your DNA tells your body to shed this hair. And then you come out, looking normal. But in these cases where you hear about the wolf man, or even the Sasquatch or the wild men, the woodwose, in your neck of the woods, is these people that had a genetic malfunction and was born covered in hair from head to toe like Esau was. And it's just, it's wild to look at because, once again, all those things that I mentioned are worldwide. It doesn't matter what culture you go to, what continent, language, people group, they all have similar stories. The names may be a little different, but it's just wild to see. And when I got to looking through Esau, that was honestly so mind-blowing for me because I grew up in church my whole life and never heard of this stuff. And so when I got to looking through him, he come out, covered in hair. It's a Polaroid picture of Genesis 3:15 in the seed war. Then when I got to looking through the extra biblical books, it just says flat out that Michael was the guardian angel of Jacob, but Esau had a guardian angel, and his guardian angel was Samael. And according to the Jewish legends and text, this is the name of Satan before the fall, and he was known as the angel of death, the viper of God. And it says that he even came out with a serpent's branding, and that while his mother was pregnant, that when she would walk by a house that was devoted to Yahweh, the worship of Yahweh, that Jacob would stir with excitement. But when she would walk by a house in service to a pagan deity, that Esau would stir with excitement, and that she was in such travail that she asked around to the other women, uh, is this normal? Did you guys have this same kind of pain and complications during your pregnancy? And they all told her no. But there was one that they had heard of that had similar uh, pregnancies, and it was Nimrod's mother. And once I got into the book of Jasher, it says that, and of course, let me back up, the trading of the birthright, that is like the most famous thing that Esau's known for. And that's why I have it depicted on the front of my book, too. I have this hairy looking wild man walking away with a bow on his back, and then the bowl of red stew underneath him, and he's walking away from it. But as a kid, that never made sense to me. I was like, modern context, your father's Donald Trump. You're the eldest son. You're about to inherit billions of dollars, the company business, the real estate. I mean, the keys to the kingdom are yours. And you come in from trading stocks all day, and your younger brother's sitting on the couch eating a bag of Doritos, and you're like, oh man, I'm hungry. Could I get some of those Doritos? And he's like, yeah, sure. Just sign over the company and everything you're going to inherit, and they're yours. Oh, yeah, sure. And even Esau says, what use is a birthright to me when I am dead? Take it. I was like, that makes absolutely no sense to me. There's something that we're missing here. And even his name, he was known as the mighty hunter, Esau. If this man was hungry, he could have went and got a lion and had lion steak for supper. This mighty hunter wasn't starving, I don't think. But the text just says that he comes in from the field exhausted. But when you go into the book of Jasher, it says that Nimrod, his name was also the mighty hunter, the Gibborim. It says that he built up hatred and envy and jealousy against Esau all of his days. And so it's kind of like the Highlander. There can only be one, baby. So they was going to show each other who the real mighty man was. And it words it like Nimrod is going out and hunting for this hairy beast of a man named Esau. And he takes a hunting party with him. And so they split off. One party goes one way, and him and two other Gibborim, the same word used time and time again to describe the Nephilim giants in the Bible, and go off looking for Esau. But it says that Esau spots them, and he hides himself. And then at the opportune time, he jumps out, and he cuts off the head of Nimrod, and then fights the other two Gibborim to the death. And it says that once he kills him, the hunting party that broke off heard the commotion and come running, but he takes the time to remove Nimrod's garments. And it says these garments were the reason that Nimrod was a Gibborim, why he was able to prevail over all the nations. And it says that he runs home, hides those garments in his tent, and then he enters the tent of his brother Jacob, where he's preparing red stew. So it dovetails perfectly into the book of Genesis. Yeah, he come in from the field exhausted, all right. He just killed Nimrod, the king, and two other giants. So modern context, you just killed the president, and the feds are after you. You're on the run. He probably sustained some life-threatening injuries during this exchange, and he was desperate, and that's why he traded it. I think the red stew is allegorical for give me sustenance, sew me up, hide me. And if you take that viewpoint, how Esau responds makes perfect sense now. When he says, yeah, sure, I'll help you, but you're going to trade me the birthright. He says, what use is a birthright to me when I am dead? Take it. And I was like, no, that makes a lot more sense. But then my next question was, what are these garments and why are they so special? Why did he take the time to steal them? And then on the run, bleeding out, takes the time to hide them before he goes to get life-saving care. And it ties into what I just spoke about earlier. This was the supernatural garments from the Garden of God, Adam's coverings, which was the symbol of kingship and priesthood. This I found out through all the extra biblical writings, this is the birthright. This is what the seed war is all over. This is basically the crown. So people that's into Game of Thrones, man, the Game of Thrones ain't got nothing on the Bible. That's the story of the Bible. And what I thought was really cool, because like I said, I'm 40-year-old. Thought I knew the Bible really well up until probably around 2012, and just seen a whole new text. And these extra biblical books and legends, Lewis Ginsburg, Legends of the Jews, is a great like 6-book series that I highly suggest anybody that's into this stuff check those out. But in there, it traces the passing down of these garments and this birthright. And I'm a Southern man, so the only kind of context I got is like your grandpa's old rifle. It's a family heirloom. It gets passed to the eldest son on down the line. It's an important family heirloom. That's what these garments were, and it traces them. You know, it says that Adam had them, Enoch had them, Methuselah had them, Noah ends up with them and takes them over the flood. And it says that in Ham's going out, Ham steals the garments, and then Ham gives them to Cush. It says Cush in his old age had Nimrod and give it to Nimrod. And when it said when Nimrod turned 20 years old, he put on the garments, and then he became a Gibborim. And once again, here's another story that made absolutely no sense to me, was the uncovering of Noah's nakedness. You know, the story that I was taught was basically Ham comes in and Noah is pissed drunk and naked, laying in the floor, and that he happens to see him, or maybe even makes a remark about him or something, making fun of him. Then he wakes up and his genealogy is cursed. And I was like, man, that's harsh. You know, if I was at school all day and I get off the bus and my dad's pissed drunk, laying in the floor naked, that ain't my fault. That's his fault. And like I mentioned earlier with the garden, the curses always correlate to the crime. And it's usually the opposite of what the person's trying to achieve. So if we look at that story, it says that Ham uncovered his father's nakedness. Well, when you go to Leviticus 17, you know, if you let Scripture interpret Scripture, it says there, to sleep with thy father's wife is to uncover thy father's nakedness. It is your father's nakedness. And I found out that this is an act of rebellion in the ancient world. We see it time and time again in the Bible. Absalom, David's son, when he runs David out of the kingdom and tries to usurp the throne, the first thing he does is he pitches a tent on top of David's house, and he goes into all of David's concubines in the sight of all of Israel. Reuben does the same thing. When he's trying to usurp his dominance, he sleeps with all his father's concubines as an act of rebellion to take over the household. So this was an act of rebellion. So Ham slept with his mother. And then when he goes outside, I think he tells his brothers, he's like, hey, Dad's a drunk. He's depressed. He's unfit to rule. I just did this deed. You guys go do it too. And he can't take on all three of us. You know, the world is ours. We'll divide it amongst ourselves. It's our time to rule. And it says that they, refuse the rebellion. But in that story, it says they take a garment, place upon their shoulders, and walk backwards and cover their father's nakedness. And I was like, is that the garments from the Garden of God? And then when you get to looking at the original Hebrew, it don't say a garment. It says they took the garment, placed it on their shoulders, walked backwards, and covered their father's nakedness. So I was like, okay, even theologically, this makes sense. He was trying to take the crown, so they took the symbol of priesthood and kingship and placed it back upon their father. And it also made a whole lot more sense when the cursing comes, because he curses Canaan, not Ham. And it's like, well, if you're reading this chronologically, Canaan's not even born yet. So why is he cursing Canaan? Because it says that when he recovered from his wine, it doesn't give you a time. We assume it's a day. I think it was probably several months down the road once he drunk all the grapes dry. There was no more to drink, so he come off the wagon, so to speak. And when he did, he noticed a baby bump that his wife was rocking, and it wasn't his, and that they were going to name it Canaan. And he heard about the rebellion. So he said, "Cursed be Canaan." He said, "A servant to thy brother Shem and Japheth he shall be." And I was like, oh man, that's the only way he could be Shem and Japheth's brother is if, yeah, they got the same mother, bro.
Doc, people are really fascinated by this. You got tons of questions coming in. I'll stop hogging you and start to put some of these questions forward to you. Jan wants to know, do blood groups have relevance?
Honestly, I don't know, but I've heard a lot of people talk about like the Rh negatives and things like that. But honestly, I really don't know. But there's two groups with this serpent seed, and I guess I want to tell you where mine is, where my flag is. There's some people that thinks that there's two seed lines, and one is irredeemable, and they're destined and born to go to hell. They're unredeemable. I don't take that stance. I take the stance of we're basically, if you go back far enough, we're all mutts. I mean, we all got some muddy genealogies. We probably got all a little touch of, Nephilim or something in us. But I think at the cross, he shed his blood for all. And Paul tells you, to preach the gospel unto all creatures, all of creation. So I think that yes, the blood can set you up for failure and for damnation, but I think we all have a free will choice. So I just wanted to say that because there are a lot of people that hold to the serpent seed theory that use it for what am I looking for? Ulterior motives, for racist motives, because there's been plenty of people like the Ku Klux Klan. They adopted this. I do not take that standpoint.
All right, so A. Baker, why do you think ESAU has that Esau?
Yeah.
Why did he hate his birthright, please?
Yeah, and that's the thing is, that's what I was always taught. I was always taught that he just hated his birthright and he was just so eager to give it away, and that he was a man of the flesh. He didn't think of the long game. He just thought of the now. So whatever would please his eyes or flesh of the now, that's what he was going to go for. But I think he didn't despise it, because when you look at that story, he was bleeding out, dying, and desperate. So he told his brother whatever he wanted to hear so he could get that life-saving care, I believe. And I think we see that as a matter of fact, because later when Isaac goes to bless them, because this is basically like a verbal agreement. If I tell you, Sean, I'm like, hey, we're good friends. I want you to have my 2010 Dodge Challenger. That's a verbal agreement. When I die, you could go up to my family and be like, hey, Justin told me I could have his car. And they'll be like, well, we just got back from the lawyer's office. Here's the will signed, and it ain't going to you. So I looked at Isaac's deathbed blessing as kind of like the lawyer office, getting that stamp of approval. It's final. And he calls in Esau to give him his blessing and the birthright. And if he intended on honoring his agreement, that would have been the perfect time to say, hey, Father, I appreciate it, but I traded it to my younger brother. You need to bless him. But he doesn't do that. He's like, okay, yep, I'll go out and get you prepare you some food, and I'll come back and you can bless me. So I think that shows that he didn't despise it. He wanted it. And when he comes back and realizes that the fix is in, because if we pay attention, what happens in that story, Rebecca hears the conversation, tells Jacob to go out and kill what? A goat, and bring the meat to her, and she would prepare a delicious meal, and that they would wrap him in this goat's fur, and he would pretend to be Esau and steal the birthright and blessing. So where Esau's talking about being this hairy, that's not poetic language. I mean, he was literally that hairy. But the garments are there too, because it's like the cherry on top. A lot of people miss it. Before she sends Jacob in, it says that she goes to Esau's tent and takes his quote unquote special garments. So I think she took those garments from the Garden of God and placed it on Jacob. And when he walked in, deceived him. But after everything was done, Esau comes back. He's mad. He screams out in anger and he threatens to kill Jacob for stealing his birthright. And Jacob ends up having to leave and hide out in the land of Haran for many years till his brother's wrath subsided. So I don't think he despised it at all. I mean, he was fighting like hell to keep it and was even willing to kill his brother to try to get it back.
So is this why the royal families are so worshipped and called blue bloods and think they're so special? Does it relate to these bloodlines, the history of these bloodlines?
Yes. I think the whole blue bloods is going back to this dragon court, or in the biblical lens, this serpent seed. And they were the elder brother. Dominion and the right to rule was supposed to have been theirs, but they were quote unquote screwed out of their birthright. And so you see this with Jacob and Esau. You see it with Cain and Abel. You even see it with Abraham. When Abraham, him and Sarah can't have a child, well, Sarah's freaked out thinking that she's going to be replaced by a younger woman. So she takes Hagar and gives Hagar to Abraham and says, sleep with her, have a lineage with her. And he does, and he has Ishmael. Ishmael was the oldest son. He was supposed to get the birthright and the inheritance. But what happens? Rebecca miraculously gets pregnant, and the younger brother gets the birthright. So, I mean, I think that we just see this time and time again. Even the parable of the prodigal son. This is the same story. In that story, what happens? You have an older son that is always there by the father's side, but the younger son wants his birthright and inheritance now. So he gets it, and he goes off and he squanders it away. That's us, folks, the younger brother. And then what happens? The younger brother comes back and begs for forgiveness and to be taken back into the home, into the family. But the father's waiting by the gate with open arms. And it says they put a signet ring of authority and a cloak of authority back on the younger brother and restores him back to his position. Well, what happens? The elder brother's pissed. He pulls his father to the side and he said, basically, I've been here the whole time, Father. I've never left you. I've never soiled our family name. I've not squandered my inheritance. I've been the good child. But you throw this big party for this joke of a son. Where's my party? Where's my celebration and love feast that you've thrown for him? I've been here the whole time. I think that's once again another microcosm of the overall story of the Bible and of God's family, the elder brother, the angelic race, and the younger brother, humanity.
So with Bohemian Grove, then you've got all these world leaders getting together to do this mock blood sacrifice. How does that tie into this?
I think that these type of groups and things like that are kind of like the Freemasons. I tell people, do I think every person that's a part of the Freemasonry is a Luciferian occult member that worships Satan? No. I think that for the most part, they're in it for just a good old boys club to get away from the wife, have some drinks, and have a club and a hobby and camaraderie. But the higher ups you go, those are the ones like Albert Pike talks about in his book, Morals and Dogma, that once they get to the 32nd and 33rd degree, that's when it's revealed to them that the grand architect is Lucifer, the light bearer. So, and I kind of use this analogy, I've used it before, it kind of shows my age, but the original Ninja Turtles, you remember when they're in New York and the Foot Clan starts this little group for all the wild teenagers to come to and play video games, and they have this big warehouse. Well, that warehouse is full of thousands of kids. They go there, smoke and party and play video games. They know nothing about the Foot Clan, even though the Foot Clan runs it. But there's a select few that they see promise in, that they walk up to discreetly and say, hey, come back here at the back room with us. We're going to show you what we really do. I think that's the same thing. And I think it's so muddy. And I'm not going to pretend to say that I know everything, but my opinion is that you have these groups. Some are just kind of like sleight of hand, like look over here at this while we are over here doing this, deception type things. Or there are groups where they pretend to bring in people and make them feel important and use them as like foot soldiers and cronies. But the higher ups that are never seen at these things are the ones behind the scenes pulling the strings, kind of like the Ezekiel 28 king of Tyre and the Pharaoh of Egypt, how there's this entity in the ear of the world leader pulling the strings and nudging them to do their bidding. I think that's the same thing we see today.
All right. So the next question then is from Bonnie. Who do you know and thoughts about Astana, also called the City of the Fallen Angels?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
I'm not even. You're also getting asked about Lilith.
Oh, Lilith. See, I think with Lilith is the Jewish legends and ways of basically splitting off of Eve into two personalities, basically. And this dragon court, this dragon lineage, takes a lot of biblical history and a lot of world history and kind of morph them and spin them into each other. And I'm of the opinion that, like the Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, they, to like basically preserve the innocence of Eve, like split her into two personalities. And Lilith is the one that gets the blame for being the evil one and for propagating the serpent seed. And so, from people that I've talked to and read, I think that sounds feasible to me because she was one of the original patriarchs. And if this serpent seed thing is true, and I think they believed it, whether it's true or not, they believed it. This was a way of them preserving the innocence of one of the patriarchs.
Gotcha. All right, you've got a question from Agent Orange. Do you have any links that head towards the ancient Americas bloodline?
Well, I take the position of L.A. Marzulli, and I try to give credit where credit is due. I've never really had an original idea in my life, but I love to read, and I love to get different perspectives on subjects and kind of compile the pieces together and try to form an overall opinion. But L.A. Marzulli, he's got a pretty good theory that he has worked out with Fritz Zimmerman that I kind of hold to. And they basically say that when you get Joshua and Caleb coming into the Holy Land and cleansing the Holy Land, this is where a lot of people want to say, well, your God's a genocidal God. He called for the devastation of entire people groups, mass genocide. Well, when you read into that, all the clans that he tells them to do that to devout to destruction, were known Nephilim giant clans. He was trying to purge the land of this hybrid race. And he says that he believes that during this conquest, the smart ones anyway, seen how they just rolled through AI like it wasn't nothing. They got to Jericho and they just marched around the city and collapsed the walls without even swinging the first sword. I think the smart ones were like, oh, hell nah, we're out of here. We ain't looking to die. So they started migrating north. And then you had this certain group that was later known as the Phoenicians. They were known seafaring people. I think that they loaded up their boats and they sailed to the Americas. And during this time frame, they speculate that the waters, were like 200 foot higher. And there was a direct path, like from around New England, straight into the Great Lakes area. And here at this Great Lakes area, around the Island Royale, is the one of the largest and most purest copper mines in the world. And this copper mine, scientists have guesstimated of the removal of the copper to be like hundreds of thousands of tons of copper missing from this place. And that copper tests at 98.8% purity. It's the purest copper in the world, so they can pinpoint it. And they find that copper all over the world. So I think these giants come to North America, went into the Great Lakes, mined all this copper, and they were seafaring people going back and forth, fueling the Bronze Age, I believe. And that's why we find this 98.8% pure copper in China, Europe, South America, Africa, everywhere. It's everywhere because it was from these Nephilim giant tribes that escaped during the Great Diaspora. And then from there, they took the Ohio River Valley straight down and got deeper into North America. And I think that's why we see all these mounds in North America. You have Serpent Mound, you have Cahokia, Enon, Miamisburg, just all these huge, Newark, these huge megalithic earthworks. And it's all concentrated in this Ohio River Valley, I think, because that's where they traveled up and down through the North American continent.
So the next question then is from A. Baker. How does the Ark of the Covenant play into this?
The Ark of the Covenant. I think that the Ark was basically not something that they were like fighting over as much. I think that was basically the covenant symbol given to God's chosen people that held the tablets and held the staff or the rod of Moses. But we do see another supercharged relic, whether it's legend, lore, fact or fiction, but the Holy Grail. And we see, the occult symbolism with that and how the occult chased after that. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis went off looking for these relics because they believed them to be powerful, supercharged relics. And I think they were after this big time. And that's why you have the Knights of the Round Table, and you have all these legends and lore. King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, looking for the Holy Grail, Percival, all that stuff in there about them having these fisher kings, these divine right to rule people guarding, this supernaturally charged relic. And I think that is a pretty pivotal piece to the puzzle. And I love how Graham Hancock in his book, The Sign and the Seal, talked about how the Nabra, forgive me because I'm a Southern man, I can barely speak English, so these big words I have trouble with, but the Nabra Hagast, which was basically the Ethiopian legends, how they line up perfectly parallel, just different names, with the story of Percival. And how the Nabra Hanagast says that Sheba, when she came up to see King Solomon, that they got together and she left and was pregnant and didn't realize it until after she got back. And according to their legends, she gives birth to Menelik the first. And this is a righteous seed line from Solomon. And Percival tells a story about a white European aristocrat, comes down to Ethiopia, finds a black woman, falls in love with her. They have a child. I think his name was Phrenitz or something like that in the Percival story. But all these things line up perfectly with these Ethiopian legends. And Graham Hancock traces that and thinks that it's like basically a hidden treasure map for the Ark of the Covenant. And he thinks that the Ark of the Covenant, that the Holy Grail was code for the Ark of the Covenant, and that it wound up in Ethiopia. And that's the last time that they had any kind of traces of it, because this Menelik, supposedly, according to the legends, went to see Solomon when he was an adult and said, hey, you're my dad, basically. And he caked him in, but then Menelik steals the ark and smuggles it down into Ethiopia. So if there is any kind of like supernatural relic in this seed war, I think it would be this Holy Grail.
You got some quite esoteric questions coming in, but I'll keep going with them. All right, so Professor Hamamoto, can you comment on current bloodline merging between the Han Chinese, Ku Jin, and the Ashkenazi Jews, Larry Summers?
Yeah, that honestly, guys, I've not got that deep into it. I just finished this book in January and released it, and so I'm just basically got my toes dipped into the deep end of this pool, and this is a deep pool. But what I found so far is very compelling, and I'm starting to dig down through it. But I think we see hints of